Hey, my name is Brian Fisher here with iZotope, and today we're going to be jumping into the topic of submixes, what they are, why to use them, and how to use them to enhance your production. So first off, what are submixes? So at its most basic level, a submix is just when you send a group of tracks to a bus in order to process them together. Now this can be used for a variety of reasons, including kind of speeding up your workflow, saving CPU, as well as enhancing certain parts of your mix and creating cohesion. There are so many different ways to go about using submixes, so I'm just going to explain a fairly simple way that I use them in my mixes, so stick around if you want to learn more. All right, I'm going to show you how I use submixes in a song that I wrote and mixed called On Hold by my band Eastern Souvenirs. So first off, I want to explain kind of the two different ways that I use submixes. So the first way that I use submixes is to group similar instruments or multi-track instruments. So for example, I have a drum bus up here that consists of a drum loop as well as supporting samples of kick and snare and overheads. And so I've sent them all to the same bus for processing. Logic has a really easy way to do this called track stacks. So you can basically create a folder that automatically routes your tracks to a new bus so you can process them together. It also makes it really easy to organize everything in the session view. Okay, the next instrument that I have grouped together is the acoustic guitar. So in this case, I double tracked acoustic guitar. I have left and right panned separate takes, but playing the exact same part. And then if you go down, I have strings. So this includes a mellotron MIDI instrument and a kind of MIDI violin sort of string quartet. So I layered those together and sent them to the same bus for processing. And then I have vocals. I have lead vocals and harmonies grouped together. I have 2 copies of them panned left and right, and 2 copies of the harmony panned left and right. So I created buses for those so I could process those duplicate parts together. Okay, the next way that I like to use submixes is to group kind of instruments that perform a similar function together. I divide my mixes into 3 submixes that include a rhythm bus, which is drums, percussion, and bass guitar, kind of the foundation of the mix. And the second is the instrument bus. This is all the stringed instruments and kind of more melodic instruments, so things like guitars and piano. And then I have my vocal bus. These 3 buses include every single instrument in the mix. I also send my send effects to these buses. So for example, if I have a drum reverb, I send it to the drum bus. If I have a vocal reverb, I send it to the vocal bus. This is an important note because if you change the level relationships of the buses or the submixes, you can throw off the balance that you have with your send effects. So for example, if I want to turn down all the vocals and I turn down my vocal bus, all of a sudden my reverb is going to sound much louder in comparison unless I have that routed to the same bus so they're getting turned down together. Okay, so let's jump into the individual buses and I'll show you what kind of processing I'm using on this song. So I've created 3 aux tracks here to make it simple to see. I have the rhythm bus here. So bass guitar, percussion, and drums, like I mentioned. So in terms of processing for my rhythm bus, I used Ozone, and the first module I used was the exciter. And so one thing I like to do with my 3 submixes is apply a little bit of saturation to each one. I like doing it on the submixes instead of the master bus because I can then tailor the amount of saturation to the specific kind of instrument source. So in this case, I have the tape saturation mode of the exciter. I dialed in a small amount and did about 50-50 blend of that. All right, the next thing I did was add a little bit of EQ. So basically, after listening to the mix in context, I just wanted a little bit more sub energy from the drum kit. So I went ahead and brought up a low shelf. I also wanted a little bit more presence of the percussion and shimmer in the cymbals, so I brought up a high shelf and a little bit of kind of high mid-range boost around 6K. All right, the last thing I did was just apply a little bit of limiting just to catch any transients, that pop out. I didn't really want to kind of hit the drums hard with this. I just wanted to create a little bit more headroom. Now, keep in mind, these are going to be very, very subtle changes. I'm not trying to do anything drastic to the mix here. I'm just trying to subtly enhance the mix. In this case, kind of the rhythm section. I want it to feel lively. I want it to feel punchy. Okay, so I'm going to start with all the modules bypassed, and then I'm going to bring them in one by one. And here's a before and after of all the processing together. Okay, so the next bus is the instrument bus. So again, this includes the guitars, the keys, the more melodic instruments. So here's an example. And what I wanted to do here is just create a little bit more density and enhance the stereo image. So again, I used Ozone. But one quick note, for my instrument bus, I typically put it in dual mono mode. So what this does is basically separates the left and right channel so that they're being processed independently instead of stereo, which would process them kind of together. So basically, if you apply things like compression and you have different things happening in the left and right, they're going to be compressed differently in the left and right channel depending on that source material. So this can create a little bit more movement and even enhance the stereo image depending on your source material. The first thing I did was I wanted to knock off kind of some of the sub frequencies that were there but pretty much inaudible. So I just wanted to cut that out because there wasn't anything musical happening in there and kind of leave space for the rhythm section to occupy that area. And the next thing I did is just bring up kind of a very slight high shelf boost, just to bring up a little bit more of the kind of sparkle of the acoustic guitar. So once again, I have the exciter in tape mode. I added a similar amount of saturation. Okay, the last thing I did was a little bit of parallel compression. So I have a pretty fast attack time of 3 milliseconds, ratio of 4:1, and a release time that I tried to kind of time with the rhythm of the song. So it's kind of on the 16th note division. And then I have a 30% blend of that compression. All right, so I'm going to bring the modules in one by one. And here's a before and after of all the processing together. Okay, moving right along to our vocal bus. So here we have all the vocals and harmonies bussed together. You can hear right here. Waiting forever, looking for answers. Okay, so just like the other buses, I used Ozone. The first thing I did was cut out some of the sub frequencies. No other changes here, so tonally, you're not really going to hear a difference. All right, the next thing is the exciter. I just used a very subtle amount here just to kind of create that same character and cohesion with the other buses, but didn't really want anything too noticeable or audible. All right, the next thing I did is a little bit of bus compression on the vocals. I have a 2-to-1 ratio, attack time of about 8 milliseconds, release of about 85 milliseconds, auto gain turned on. This is just to glue the vocals together and kind of make them feel like one unit. All right, so the last thing I do is add a little bit of dynamic EQ to tame some of those harsh, kind of biting frequencies in the upper mid-range. This can be a problem when you're layering, a lot of layers of vocals. You can get kind of these harsh buildups. So at about 3.7K and 2.2K, I have 2 dynamic cuts. So yeah, they only kind of duck during the loudest parts of the vocal or when I'm, singing harsher consonants. All right, now I'm going to bring the modules in one by one.
It feels like we're waiting forever, looking for answers that we already know. It feels like we're waiting forever.
And here's a before and after of all the processing together.
It feels like we're waiting forever, looking for answers that we already know.
Okay, so that's it. That's all the processing that I used on these 3 submixes. Now I'm going to play back everything together. I'm going to do a before and after. So here is it with all of the processing bypassed. All right, thank you so much for watching this video. We talked a lot about submixes. We didn't get into talking about master bus processing. So if you want to learn more about that, you can check out my other video about how to get wider and fatter mixes using Ozone. If you want to try out any of the techniques I demonstrated, as always, go to iZotope.com to start a free trial. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.